Okay, so we make a start. The purpose of this afternoon is for Wyn Evans and I, who we sort of had a chat already some while ago, sort of thinking that we share quite a lot in common when it comes to thinking about what kind of place the university should and could be. Would you say that's?
Oh, I think that's very fair. I mean, in a first past the post election, we would be rivals. But this is a single transferable vote election, so we can emphasise our shared values and support each other, secure in the knowledge that votes won't be lost because they're efficiently transferred.
So that's why we're here. We're here to think about how the Chancellorship at this Cambridge University could be done differently. And sorry about the heat, which actually it's cooler outside than it is inside, but there's not much I can do to reverse that. We were going to start with me asking a number of questions of Wyn, and then Wyn will ask a number of questions of me. What I have done is, if anybody hasn't seen Wyn's manifesto, I brought along a number of copies, and I also brought along a number of copies of mine, just in case you wanted to refresh yourselves in order to frame questions. But as Wyn and I talk to each other, if something crops up that you want to speak about, please feel free to interrupt us. We're thinking of this as a conversation between us and also with you. And so that's the idea. So shall I start? Was by trying to find out why you thought it was a good idea for you to stand as Chancellor, Wyn? So
I've been at Cambridge a long time, about 20 years, and like many academics, I was primarily immersed in my research and teaching. Then an event occurred in my department in 2021, and I tried to intervene to help someone who was being very seriously bullied. And that led me into a different world, a world where the senior management of the university had very different values to what is espoused on their websites. I don't want to dwell on the bullying incident. I want to dwell on the fact that what are the core values and mission statement of the university do not seem to be translated into action by people at the top of the university. So when an opportunity came to put my name forward for the Chancellorship, I was interested in the possibility of the university doing things differently. So the people who control the university are very small in number. Just the Vice-Chancellor, the Registry, a small group of Pro-Vice-Chancellors and heads of department. And ordinary academics have very little voice in how the university is actually run. Let me return the question to you, Tony. What caused you to put your name forward?
Well, I had never thought of applying to be Chancellor of the university. In fact, I knew very little about the process until a group of people came to my house and asked me if I would stand. And because I'm involved in various campaigns around the city, campaigning about the environment, I'm also involved in the campaign for justice for Palestinians. And they thought there should be someone who would speak out on these issues during the campaign, and as Chancellor to shift the university towards looking at the extent to which it's an ethical force for its staff, for its students, and for its image locally and globally. And also campaign about the massive, what I see as the unsustainable overdevelopment of the city, to which the university is entirely committed. And that seems a strange thing for a university to be involved in a way. I mean, of course the university has lots of land holdings and stands to gain. In this area you can gain more from selling land for development than almost anywhere else in the country. But at the same time, it ties the university to what I see as an obsolete economic model, which in the end is going to destroy this city and this country and much more widely than that.
So I'd say your perspective was slightly broader than mine. I'm interested in internal university matters and you're interested in a more global picture, but we both want the university to return to its core mission, which is research and teaching and mentoring. And of course the problems of Cambridge University are mirrored throughout the higher education sector in this country, which is now under serious stress.
Yes, that's really true. And I suppose I spent decades in universities. I worked as a professor of education. I know what happened to education, particularly from the 1980s onwards. We've seen a kind of series of destructions, if you like, destructive forces entering the university sector, turning the university into a business allied to a growth model, which has, the result of which has been the kinds of things you talk about, is a shift away from a focus on the well-being of staff, one, but on the core mission of education and research, and towards managing a large business corporation. And when you hear people say that the university is a development corporation with a sideline in education, that is not good for the reputation of Cambridge.
So something that's worth mentioning now is that one of the other candidates for the Chancellorship is Lord Browne of Madingley, and of course he played a critical role in this transformation and is associated with the Browne Report, which substantially increased tuition fees for university students. And we now look around at the devastation in the university sector in the United Kingdom, and we can see that the chickens have come home to roost from that report. So one of the things that it's worth bearing in mind is in a single transferable vote election, we can all arrange to ensure that our vote counts and counts against Lord Browne if we're unhappy with what has happened to universities.
I think that's one issue why Lord Browne would be an entirely unsuitable candidate. People say that he is the university's favourite. Lord Browne is ex-CEO, everybody knows, ex-CEO of BP, British Petroleum, and him being a candidate rests on the idea, reported in the press, that he made a switch towards the end of the 1990s and no longer supported the expansion of extraction of fossil fuels. This is entirely false. He then went on from being CEO of BP to being CEO of Quadrilla, the fracking company. He went on from Quadrilla to be head of a Russian-owned oil extraction company. He claims that he is interested in climate change, but he makes no clear pronouncements about the way in which the expansionist BP, as it is now, should rapidly change course. It would bring the university again into disrepute if someone like him were elected. I think people like me would carry on with our campaigns. In Cambridge, it would be very uncomfortable for the university.
So to say a few words in support of Lord Browne, I think he did have a difficult decision to make to come out, and that did take some bravery because he was a businessman. I would be more convinced about his switch if, when I looked at his personal life, there was evidence of a commitment to a more sustainable lifestyle. But there are advertisements carrying John Browne's name for private jets, which seems inconsistent with any commitment to tackling climate change. So for me, he would be a poor candidate for the university and would cause a lot of distress among many of the academics and many of the residents of Cambridge University.
because, he represents a strand that is already within the university, which is to talk about cutting back on environmental damage, cutting back on emissions, whilst at the same time ploughing research time, searching for funding which will effectively greenwash the university and take the spotlight away from its poor record on reducing its own emissions, and on campaigning as a responsible force in the world for a future that is viable for its students. I mean, at the moment, we're on a dreadful course. As Sir David King pointed out 4 years ago, he said we have 3 or 4 years left in which to take those decisions, rapidly decarbonise the UK and around the world. 3 or 4 years left, and precious little is being done in response.
So the university has a strategy to divest from companies causing climate change by 2030 and is aiming for net zero by 2038. It's very important that the Chancellor ensures that the university retains those commitments. We all know that budgets now are tight, and very often these kind of things are the first casualties of tight budgets. So that's a big job for the next Chancellor. But let me pick up on another thing that Tony said, which is words, not action. There's a very famous quote from Westminster: if you intend to do nothing, then you must keep on talking about it and talking about it. And we can see that in many of the actions of Cambridge University. For example, there are nominally commitments to equality, diversity and inclusion, and there are nominally commitments to anti-bullying, but these mean nothing because no one at the top of the university really commits to actions which would prevent bullying or which would include more people. So another role that the Chancellor must have is to ensure that at the top of the university, embedded in the top, is respect for a proper culture in the university, a culture that is against bullying and harassment, and a culture that is inclusive and respectful.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, and I think that, a lot of my work in education was based around the idea of the development of education involving putting into action a framework of values. And for me, values meant you detect values through action. You don't detect them through a statement of what your values are. You detect them through a statement of what your actions are. And if you just take the issue of who can vote in this election, it's shaming for a candidate to be approached by people working really hard for the university, in full-time employment, who simply don't have a vote because their grade is not regarded as being high enough for them to have the thought or the concern that they should be part of this election. And certainly, I'm sure if you or I were elected, that would be something, of course, we would be concerned about. I just returned for a moment. I went last week to the showcase of sustainability action across the university. Now, it's a particular interest of mine, but I was the only candidate there. Now, people were doing great things across the university, really keenly, both in the colleges and in the university itself, although there's a problem in the university of the relationship between the two, so people in colleges were not getting proper credit for the efforts they were making by the university authorities. But they, after all this work that was going on, there was a key graph. Have emissions in the university gone up or down? And they've gone up. So even with all the work. And you can see why, because it has to be a much bigger commitment. And if you take the responsibility of the university for emissions, flying policy would be central to it. So the university is responsible for the flying miles and emissions of every student who comes to the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership on an expensive course on sustainability, where people fly in from around the world, but it's responsible for every student who comes here and then their family visits and so on. So that it has to have a realistic policy, which it has to take responsibility for its emissions. Should we push on to some other issue?
Well, we could just add that there is a tremendous opportunity for research here for the university, that is, research into more sustainable buildings, more sustainable animal husbandry, and so on. So I see this also as an opportunity for the university to extend its research portfolio and contribute to solutions which we need to face as a society.
Yeah.
These have to be solved now by our engineers, our scientists, and so on.
And I've said it's so serious that you have to give it the name of something like a reverse Manhattan Project. Given the time we haven't got any time really to limit environmental catastrophes. It's got to be in whatever seconds we have left. It's got to be done with huge amount of energy. But instead, the university is supporting projects on, for example, refreezing the Arctic. And of course, carbon capture and storage, carbon credits. Yes, let's look at natural capital. These are all greenwash enterprises, when the real importance is let's solve the problem of why it is that people are not cutting back on emissions, and can the university use whatever influence it has to apply the first rules of sustainability, which are refuse and then reduce. It's obvious. We all know it, and yet who's applying it?
So I think there's a lot of support amongst the academics of the university for ensuring that Cambridge meets the targets that it has set. And it needs a Chancellor to drive this forward and make sure that the university's feet are held to the fire and they carry out what they have promised to do.
Would you like to say a bit more about what difference it would make if you were Chancellor?
So, this involves trying to answer the question, how does Cambridge University change? So when I was an undergraduate, I thought professors were very powerful and they would be listened to. Now I'm a professor, I realise, of course, that's completely untrue, that the university is controlled by a very small group of people. And so to change the university, it's necessary to build alliances amongst those people. Now, a role that is important is played, of course, by the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Deborah Prentice. I have a high opinion of her, having met her on a number of occasions. I think she's a genuine person and she understands some of the problems in the university. But of course, she was originally at Princeton, where she had a very successful career as first a psychology professor and then an administrator, and came to Cambridge only 2 years ago. So for her, it's difficult to work out how to help Cambridge to change. And so I think a sympathetic Chancellor who is supporting her in things that I think she wants to do but doesn't know how to, could actually make a big difference. Cambridge is very resistant to change. Even small changes take a long time. We'd like to see quite substantial changes in quite a short period of time, and that will require a Chancellor who can help the Vice-Chancellor get things done. So that would be one reason that I'm keen to put my name forward to Chancellor. Let me return the question to you, Tony.
I think it would be a shock to the system for the university to have a Chancellor who is not rich and doesn't have a wealth of establishment contacts, maybe isn't a famous or a celebrity. But you only have to look at what the university has written about Lord Sainsbury to see what they would like as a Chancellor. Lord Sainsbury, they say, was wonderful at putting the senior members of the university in contact with important people. And if you think that the university is wed to an anachronistic growth model, something has got to change. If it doesn't change this time, because somebody like you or somebody like me, it just helps to open up a conversation about the culture of the university, then it will happen. It will happen in 10, 20, 30 years' time. The university hasn't got 800 years to run. The world is changing fast. You can feel it in the air, if you like. And to actually have the opportunity to change now through this election, opening up this discussion, will save the university from being forced to change in 10, 20, 30 years' time.
Let me add another thing that is in favour of electing either myself or Tony, and that is we're academics. This is the leadership of an academic institution that we're talking about. If a bunch of celebrities were to get together and look for a leader, they wouldn't choose an academic. If a bunch of businessmen were to get together and choose a leader, they wouldn't choose an academic. So why should academics choose businessmen or celebrities? It's very important that the leader of Cambridge University is an academic, and this has happened repeatedly in the history of the Chancellorship. Lord Adrian and Lord Rayleigh and Lord Thomson, all Nobel Prize winners, were Chancellors of Cambridge University. We, the academic community in Cambridge University, should elect an academic as a Chancellor, not a businessman adept at raising money, and not a celebrity. The celebrities who are standing do not seem to me to have very much knowledge of what is happening in our universities. And yet this is a critical time for higher education, not just in Cambridge, but in the United Kingdom, and indeed, when we look at events in America, throughout the world.
It's not very high level. I agree with you. It's really good to know what universities are like, what higher education is like. That's an important part of somebody who's going to be close to the university, who's in a position where they will not have the wool pulled over their eyes by somebody telling them about how the university is run. But I don't think it's great intellectual thought to insist that critical engagement is part of the debates and discussion within the university. If I return to that session I was at last week on the sustainability showcase, it was lovely people who they're all individually able to think reflectively. I've chatted to some of them outside of that situation, but in that situation, their voices are entirely constrained. So I mention emissions have gone up. That should have been a moment when murmuring went round the room, we broke into small groups, we discussed the issue. There's another issue which was like screaming at me. Yes, the university engages in, there has a number of centres of greenwashing. Surely that is constantly pushing against the efforts of the people in the sustainability group. They're just insisting that every time you visit the university, you want people to be critically engaged, to enter into dialogue with each other, to raise difficult issues, is something that I think we would both want to insist upon.
So that's a core value of the university. That's part of the mission statement. And that's why I value particularly an academic holding this position, because I think an academic will be much more concerned about the core values and the mission statement than anything else. I want to see Cambridge University excellent at research and teaching and mentoring, and when we come to making judgments about how to spend money, these three things should be core: research, teaching and mentoring. So to give an example that's been in the news, and I know Tony feels strongly about this, we heard yesterday that Cardiff University had paid a lot of money to a law firm, Shakespeare Martino, to devise the orders that caused the Palestinian camps in Cardiff University to be removed. And this is a university that has a £30 million deficit and is busy shutting courses and sacking professors. Anyone who is an academic will say the core values of the university are research and teaching, and that is what we should be spending money on, and we should not be spending money on corporate lawyers.
Yep, I agree with you.